trying to get into. It's not going to. It's not going to. Presentation. There's a lot of photos. Oh, yes, 90s. Okay. No, not yet. Mustafa, your presentation's not loading up into presentation mode. You got like 96.
Yeah, they just run. They just automatically run.
Oh, so
every 10 seconds, the slide will switch.
But it's not in presentation mode. I'm trying to click it. Slideshow mode. It's not.
Why don't we do this? Why don't you?
Is there another way to
come out? And it's here, right? So whenever I get ready, you just click it and let it do what it do.
Okay.
Does that work?
I'm not sure it's gonna work.
Do you guys want to do a test run on it? We should do a test run.
Yeah.
Well, it was on the screen.
Hold on a second. It was running?
Yeah, it was running on the screen.
Okay.
I call one of your students up here.
There it goes.
Okay.
So is it 10-second timer? Let it run.
About like 9.
So you're going to just work.
As soon as you click it, it'll do what it do.
Oh, I got you. So you just need to click it to open again. So
Yeah.
how to just close it again?
I guess so.
Okay. You just gonna click it and let it do what it do.
Yeah, or you can click it. I don't know.
Okay.
Whoever's here.
I'll do it. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Boris Lushniak. I am proud and humbled to be the dean here at the School of Public Health at the University of Maryland. And as dean of a School of Public Health, there's nothing that fills a dean with more happiness and more a sense of pride than actually speaking about that school's faculty and students. And it's my pleasure here, first and foremost, to welcome you late in the day to the University of Maryland here in College Park, to this incredible conference, this incredible workshop, this incredible opportunity for us to discuss really critical issues. University of Maryland School of Public Health has been around for 12 years. We're a young school of public health. I'm the third of 3 deans who have served there. Started about 2.5 years ago after 28 years, not in the academic world, but in the world of service, in the world of federal service. I was an officer in the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps. Worked at CDC, worked at FDA, worked in the Office of the Surgeon General. And part of that service component, even though I was embedded in the feds, was ultimately to do what? To make sure that public health touches communities, that public health is out there doing good for others. I remind people about the mission of public health. So I tell our students, it's 3 Ps. It's promoting health and well-being. It's preventing disease and injuries and needless mortality. So preventing, promoting, with the idea that ultimately it's about prolonging a high quality of life for our people. And our people includes not just Maryland, not just the United States. Our people include the planet's people. It is my pleasure to introduce an incredible member of the faculty of the School of Public Health. I can boast about Jacoby Wilson. Many of you know him, but I, as dean, I can boast about him. And the beauty of Jacoby is not so much, I received a whole list of incredible accolades, right? He serves on boards. He's out there in the community. Let me just tell you a story about Jacoby that really nails it. And that's running into Jacoby late in the evening, right? Either entering the school usually, sometimes exiting the school at a late hour, but always a student or 2 in tow. Always that sense that someone's there hanging on. And when I stop them, I'll say, what are you working on? And it's not so much what he tells me, because of course, he's a faculty person. He's a professor here, right? He's one of the esteemed people who are gifted with this idea of connecting, not just with students, but with that community. But I enjoy mostly speaking with that student. Let that student tell me what this man means to them. He has done incredible things. And really intertwining things that are critical for public health. Environmental health. What's going on with, yes, our communities, with our nation, with our world. Intertwined with social justice. With the ideas, what's happening with people out there? And are we creating a fair and even playing field for all? And then that's intertwined with the concept of health equity. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Dean of the School of Public Health, it is my pleasure to congratulate Jacoby Wilson on yet again putting together an incredible meeting of minds, meeting of passions, meeting of people dedicated to a mission. So give it up for Jacoby Wilson, incredible leader.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Give yourselves an applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dean. I appreciate those kind words. I want to do a flashback to last year just to get us a little bit hyped. Wakanda forever! So for those of you who weren't here, I did that last year. I opened it up with Wakanda and I closed it with Wakanda. But we're here today to close out with an excellent keynote from Mustafa Ali. Before I do that, I want to thank some of the team who really helped make this event a success. So as the Dean talked about, students are very important part of this process. I tell people all the time, my job is to do great science. My most important job is to train and empower. That's train and empower, help communities, and train and empower students. We need to have students, as the Dean said, with passion, with focus, with dedication, with skills, with tools to impact change in the communities that we're working in. So the volunteers who help, student volunteers, I just want to call them out by name. Kisanet, and we can give them a round of applause at the end. Kisanet, Kafui, Rosemary, Claudia, Alex, Yan, Minna, Sam, Crystal, Miranda, Colleen, Juliet, Gianna, Sydney, Summer, Aubrey, Jair, Jared, Laura, and Tanvi. Let's give them a round of applause, please. I want to thank some former students, PhD, who actually is going to graduate. Is it 2 weeks or next week? Next week, 2 weeks? Rihanna, 2 weeks. Rihanna Murray, she helped out too. My first MPH student who I mentored, Rebecca Rare. And I want to give a special, another round of applause specifically for Yan. Yan Michael Archer, where's Yan at? Yan, where'd you go, Yan? Yan put in a lot of work helping with the symposium. He was basically the co-coordinator with the symposium. So the reason why things were very seamless this year, why I'm really not stressed, last year I was really stressed, this year I'm tired but not stressed, is because of Yan. So let's give Yan a round of applause, please. I want to thank our sponsors who made this event a success. Without them, we wouldn't have all the great food. We wouldn't have been able to make the event free. That's really appreciated. So again, those sponsors, Audubon National Society, Center for Health, Environment and Justice, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, CHISFA, Legal Conservation Voters, Choose Clean Water Coalition, our Sociology Department, of course the School of Public Health, our Dean, also the Maryland Institute for Environmental Health, Earth Justice, Environmental Integrity Project, Center for Livable Future, Johns Hopkins, Maryland Environmental Health Network, NAMATI, Center for Smart Growth, Rachel Carson Council, Succinct, Sierra Club, Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, SRAP, Climate Reality Project, the University of Maryland School of Law, and the Union Concerned Scientists. Hopefully I got everybody on that list. And we also had a planning committee. I won't go through everybody's names, so anybody on the planning committee, can you stand up? who helped plan the symposium. So Leslie, Adrian, others. Can we give them a round of applause too? Okay, so I thank everybody. Of course, I got to thank God too. Thank you, God. I mean, I started this morning with my speech. I don't want to do another speech because that's for Mustafa to do. But now I want to introduce Mustafa Santiago Ali. I've known Mustafa for about 25 years. We met, I think, for the first time at a conference at Elizabeth City State back in 94? Leave it alone. And so Mustafa and I are also fraternity brothers too. So we're members of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And so Mustafa is a renowned thought leader, international speaker, policymaker, community liaison, trainer, and facilitator. He wears many hats. He has a nice hat on right now. He is Vice President of the Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization for the National Wildlife Federation, and also the founder of Revitalization Strategies, a business focused on moving our most vulnerable communities from surviving to thriving, which is the theme of his keynote address. Before joining the National Wildlife Federation, he was the Senior Vice President for the Hip Hop Caucus, a national nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that connects the hip hop community to the civic process to build power and create positive change. In this role, he led the strategic direction, expansion, and operation of the Hip Hop Caucus portfolio on climate, environmental justice, and community revitalization. And prior to that, Mustafa worked at the US EPA for 24 years. He began working on social justice issues at the age of 16 and joined the EPA as a student, becoming a founding member of the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. So he's a founding member of the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. Before he left the EPA, he served as Senior Advisor for Environmental Justice and Community Revitalization and Assistant Associate Administrator working to elevate environmental justice issues. Mustafa has been a soldier, a warrior, a fighter, an advocate for environmental justice basically his entire life. He was raised in West Virginia. He grew up near mining. So he knows hardcore environmental justice issues. And he's going to talk about those issues in his keynote speech and talk about how we can go from surviving to thriving and connect that to issues of climate equity, climate justice, and this Green New Deal, what I mean by this, reparations, green reparations, environmental reparations, and making sure that we restore our communities. And as I said in my speech this morning, how can we make America great if we don't take care of our kids first, right? How can we not do what we're supposed to do if we don't look at these issues? How can we make Earth Day great again? That's what I said, Mustafa, you missed it. Earth Day great again. We gotta focus on our most vulnerable. We have to focus on restoration, revitalization. So that's what Mustafa is gonna talk about in his speech. Let's welcome Mr. Mustafa Santiago Ali.
All right.
You gonna stay down there?
Yeah, I don't
Okay,
like
cool.
standing up there. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Oh, try it again. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I was going to say, I'm with family, so I don't know what Jacoby said I'm going to talk about, but, you know. And let me tell y'all a little secret. So I've known Jacoby since he had an afro, so, you know, that was a long time ago. A long time ago. But it's a blessing to be here with you. You guys are going to see some folks you know and some situations that you know, and it's good. I mean, half the room here helped raise me and Jacoby and a whole bunch of other folks. So we owe you a debt of gratitude for everything that you have done and continue to do, because our movement is intergenerational. And even when you cross over, we still call your name to come back and help us. So let's give a round of applause to our elders who are in the room. You know, we know the situation that we're in, but I like to also help us to understand, as I'm traveling around the country, I've been in 30 cities in the last 60 days, that we have power. And sometimes we forget that, and we're going to talk about that. And sometimes it's good for us to sort of anchor in those successes that folks have already had, because they had to go through some tough times. So you guys have seen, and I wanted to call out some of the folks who often don't get attention. They'll be flowing also in the background. But, you know, since we got off the slave ships, folks know people been putting people in tough jobs, taking away their traditional cultural practices. Our indigenous brothers and sisters moved, in many instances, from their lands. facing some very similar situations. I also make sure that I also sort of highlight our Asian American and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters also, because they help to build this infrastructure that the president keeps wanting to talk about. So let's make sure that we're honoring the people who helped to build that along with others in our country. And the fact that Latino brothers and sisters own part of this country and it was stripped away from them, sometimes through war, sometimes through other ways. But we also have to honor the fact that people have been struggling and making progress. People told women that you would never get the right to vote, and sisters said, oh yeah? And it took a while, but people continue to move forward and press and press and press. They told black folks you would never get the right to vote, and we're still working on that in some situations, in some places. I ain't gonna say nothing about Florida, but you know, we still continue to move forward. And sometimes folks don't talk enough about some of the other movements that have gone on, the American Indian movement, and all the work that went in there as indigenous brothers and sisters at that time were pushing forward to help to make sure that Native American brothers and sisters, you know, had the rights, the basic rights that those treaties and everything else that was put in place said that they were supposed to have. And then people don't talk enough about the Chicano movement and Cesar Chavez and his connection to the work. And some of the folks who are in here have been doing it a while. They know that the connection that exists there. They remember the No Grapes movement and campaign and many of the others that Chicano brothers and sisters were also pushing forward on. So we should celebrate the fact that there is power that exists inside of our communities and that it takes hard work, but we continue to move forward. But we also gotta deal with the fact that we also have an administration now that's doing everything in its power to not only just roll us back in relationship to environmental laws and the work that folks are doing in the climate space, but also in relationship to our civil rights. So people tell us that, you know, this country that we live in now, it's supposed to be built on democracy, but that democracy seems sometimes to be fading by some of the things that we see. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the 26 minutes that I have left. Since I ran track, it's going in my head right now. And it's amazing because you guys who've heard me speak before, I believe in anchoring some of our stuff in the facts and then sort of breaking apart some of these decisions that are being made that I think are criminal. And I know we got some attorneys in the room, and some of them have sat me down and said, Mustafa, you got to be careful when you say some of these things. But I believe that there is some culpability in some of the actions that are moving forward. So we know that in our country, 200,000 people are dying prematurely from air pollution. There's no way to get away from that. Those numbers will move a little bit every year, but we know between 100 and 200,000 people are dying. So if we know that many people are dying, how in the world could you possibly be moving forward on some of these actions that you are? Actions like the Clean Power Plan, trying to roll that back, trying to eliminate that, trying to allow more carbon to go into the atmosphere. But before that carbon even goes into the atmosphere, as you have talked about, I'm sure, the impacts that are happening inside of communities, ozone that is now becoming out of control in some communities, the PM 2.5 and others that is just devastating communities. And sometimes we get it twisted. And I know I got a number of incredible, because I've watched you grow up, public health students and others who are in that space. And you know, many of us are surrounded by some of the best scientists there are. And sometimes we want to have conversations about trillion parts and billion parts and million parts. And as I often say, if Mrs. Ramirez doesn't get your conversation, if Mr. Johnson doesn't understand what you're saying, why are you saying it? We need to make sure that people understand how this is connected to their everyday lives, and when we don't, we do a disservice. Everybody do me a favor. Everybody take a deep breath. Just hold it for a second. Now let it out, because we're at the end of the conference. People are tired, and we don't need anybody passing out. You know, we got some folks in the room, or I know they were in the room, from Brandywine, Maryland. They understand how important that breath of fresh air is. We've got students in here who have been down there and who have worked with folks. I know Jacoby has been all in when he didn't have to be. We know that there are places like where I just was a few days ago on the south side of southwest Detroit, 48217. When you go there, and I've been all over this country, there There are some incredibly bad things that are happening. But when you go there in Cancer Alley, it almost is unimaginable that it is happening anywhere on our planet, but let alone in our country. You literally, when you are there and you start to breathe, you feel like you're breathing and tasting chemicals. And I know other locations across the country, but that taste is still in my mouth because I was just there. And we know that we got 25 to 27 million people in our country who have asthma. How many folks in the room know somebody who has asthma? Everybody look around. Please hold your hands up high if you know somebody. So there's one hand, two hands that are not, well, she said, I'm sorry, I was doing something. So there's one hand in this room, this large room on the campus of the University of Maryland who don't know somebody who has asthma. 7 million children in our country have asthma. And disproportionate is African American and Latino children who are the ones who are going to the emergency room and the ones who are losing their lives, but yet we want to roll back the refinery rule? There's no culpability in that? If we know the hard numbers, something don't make sense. And, you know, we got all these other things that are going on in that space that just, the amount of folks who are suffering from COPD, folks from kidney and liver disease. And here's the thing, because I used to work on gun violence issues also. There are more people who are dying from air pollution every year in our country, supposedly the greatest country in the world, depending on how you want to analyze that. So if you got more people who are dying from air pollution than who are dying from gun violence, which is an extremely important issue, and you want to roll back the basic protections, and for those of us who've worked on environmental justice, the best we've ever been able to do is just get the basics. And you don't even want folks to have the basics. You don't want communities of color to have the basics. You don't want low-income white communities to have the basics. You don't want indigenous brothers and sisters to have the basics. Then there is a problem in that space, because the basics never were good enough. For those of us who are serious about this work, we knew that even if we were able to inch it up, there were still going to be people dying. So think about this for a second, because we've got to figure out how we're going to change this system no matter who ends up being in the White House, no matter who ends up being in the State House. How is it acceptable for one person to die, let alone hundreds of thousands of people here in this country? And then if we look at the world, it really gets special. And that's where we are right now. And that's why somebody else might not tell you this, and I don't tell anybody who to vote for, but you need to vote. And you need to get a whole bunch of other people to vote. And what that means is that yes, you are tired. Yes, you are busy. Yes, you're trying to put food on the table, pay the mortgage, and all the other things that each and every one of us have to do. But you also need to be having these kitchen talks, these living room talks, these back porch talks, where you are pulling people together to say, these are some of the things that are going on, and this is why your vote matters. When I hear somebody tell me their vote doesn't matter, I start tying it into these real world things that are going on in people's lives. And that's how we begin to make change happen. By a show of hands, how many folks in the last 24 hours have had a drink of water or a beverage? Because I saw some of y'all probably out the club last night. Amazing, right? Every hand went up, even the one hand that didn't go up last time. Because you can't live. So, you know, when people say that clean air is a human right, one, and they say, you know, clean water is a human right, there's so much truth in that, but sometimes we just see it as a slogan. But there are all these people who are losing their lives, they're shortening their lives, and they are losing their wealth because of the decisions that somebody else is making when we don't get engaged in that process, or when we don't build these authentic collaborative partnerships which are so necessary to make change happen. You got folks in the room, and that's the thing, you know, when I have all the elders and others who are the ones who helped teach me, it seems almost silly for me to stand here because the experts are sitting right here at the table, and I hope that everybody is honoring that. You got folks who are sitting here who know, you know, I was recently in, I don't even remember where I was because I've been too many daggone places. But I remember I said certified animal feeding operations. And the people looked at me like they should have, because I should have never said that. I should have said hog farms, turkey farms, and chicken farms. Because that way nobody can escape what we're talking about. But folks who are here in this room have seen what has happened to the water quality when people move in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably if they could get away with it, millions of animals into small, small spaces, and then all of that stuff that comes out of the lagoons. And climate change is making it even more challenging. And that's the work that we have to do. In those states where this is going on, we got to work with folks across state lines to help them, to motivate people, to educate people, and to also get people engaged in the voting process. Because it's not going to change if we don't come together on these issues. Coal ash, all of us have been engaged around the coal ash fight. And we've seen the devastating impacts that happen in communities when the lagoons are breached or when some of this stuff is moved from, you know, other communities and creating these additional sacrifice zones. And eventually, I'm going to get environmental apartheid into this conversation because Jacoby says it all the time and I think it's cool. We've got all these things that are going on, and it took a situation. All these things were happening in African American and Latino communities and some low-income white communities, and it took Flint, Michigan to actually get people to pay attention to water quality again. And Standing Rock. Those were the two that got people's attention. While all these other things were going on around the country. And the fracking that's going on. You don't even have to drive, Jacoby, more than 20, 25 miles to get to the beginning of some of the fracking fields that are further north. And the trillions of gallons of water that are used in that space. And you guys saw some of the slides that go by that talks about that. That's the work that we have to do. So let me just transition real quickly because people are going to tell you, and many of you I know have heard this, that the money doesn't exist and that we won't be able to win on these issues. So let me give you all just a quick secret. I worked on Capitol Hill for a couple years, and I worked on appropriations while I was there. The money exists. It's about priority setting. So if people are serious, here's the other thing, and hopefully, you know, and with all the huge amount of information that you have to deal with every day, there was something that came out now about 4 or 5 days ago that talked about the 60 of the largest corporations in our country paying zero taxes. 40% of those 60 largest, oil, gas, utilities, got a $14 billion rebate. So when people tell you the money doesn't exist, maybe we need to have people pay their fair share. How many folks in the room, and I ain't gonna ask you how much, but paid taxes this year? So almost everybody, unless maybe you were a student and your parents and, you know. So isn't it crazy that we have to pay taxes, but folks who are making a huge amount of money are getting rebates while they are impacting our communities at the same time? So are we paying for people to poison us? So that is that paradigm shift that we have to have. And we have the ability to make the change. We just have to decide that we actually want to do it. And there are communities that are actually focused in that direction, organizations that are focused in that direction, and who are making real change happen. And now, we'll talk about climate change. Sometimes people get mad at me a little tiny bit because I want them to realize that the impacts that are happening from climate change probably could have been minimized to a degree if they had paid attention to the impacts that were happening in our most vulnerable communities. And let me, if it hasn't been already highlighted for you, tell you what I mean. So, we had coal-fired power plants in our communities. We had petrochemical facilities for as far as you could see in our communities. And no one wanted to pay attention when it was those black communities and those Latino communities and indigenous communities and low-income white communities. The fossil fuel pipelines primarily run through those communities. And people for decades were saying, please pay attention. These breaches are happening. People are getting sick. You don't have to go any further than Union Hill to see a recent fight. And that's just one of the fights that are going on. And folks didn't want to pay attention. And our transportation routes, for those of you who are students of history, those transportation routes that were used for some communities to garner wealth and for the extraction of wealth from other communities. So those are three of the drivers that are a part of climate change. Of course, there's the agricultural aspect and deforestation aspect, and we could go into that as well. So if people had paid attention 20, 30, 40 years ago when people were reaching out, when the environmental justice movement was first getting started and saying, hey, pay attention over here. We got some things going on. Can we get some real partnerships? And a whole bunch of organizations didn't want to pay attention, along with a whole bunch of people. That's how we got to where we are. I'm sorry, I just give real talk. I know y'all tired. I would be tired too, because this is a fight. So sometimes your spirit gets tired. Your soul gets tired. But then I see places like Spartanburg, South Carolina. I see places like the work that the Environmental Health Coalition is doing in San Diego. I see the work of Miss Margaret May in Kansas City in the Ivanhoe community, who are making change happen in the face of sometimes significant odds. People taking $20,000 grants and leveraging $300 million in changes. People clearing out crack houses and getting new homes built in and getting urban gardens, and those urban gardens then turning into people actually being able to sell the produce to deal with the food justice issues. That's power. But we never frame it that way. We say, oh, well, that was just some folks who got together and did their thing, and it's cute. No, it's not cute. It's our ability to frame out a new paradigm for the 21st century. People get upset around the Green New Deal, maybe because there were already environmental justice communities and organizations who were doing work with green zones and doing some other things. But this framework that young people have moved forward, building upon the history that already existed, is one that we need as long as equity is truly a part of that process. So you see, when you see these reports that are coming out from scientists, the IPCC report, the National Climate Assessment, that tells us that we have 11 or 12 more years, and of course there's a little bit of wiggle that's in there, we already know who are the communities that are going to have the most difficult time if we're not serious about getting the right types of planning in place. And that planning plays out in lots of different ways. So Jacoby gave me some things that I need to talk about, and I'm trying to remember them. So one of them is the National Environmental Policy Act. So we have a president, like past presidents, who wants to utilize infrastructure. Totally get that. But if you are not honoring NEPA and you're not honoring environmental justice, then we're going to have some of the similar results, some of the similar impacts from people building in the wrong places or building things incorrectly, causing additional impacts. And that's why we have to get engaged in this whole fight around NEPA and making sure that, one, it's highlighted again, two, that it's utilized properly, and three, that there's some new elements that come into those analysis that need to happen. And sometimes, you know, we're looking at this stuff and we're like, oh, well, that's just some wonky stuff. Well, that wonky stuff can play a role in either shortening our lives or helping to extend our lives. That's why we got to get engaged in this fight. We also need to be able to do it to stop some of this other, you know, sort of building that people are doing and not being done properly. We also got to get really focused on this green new economy. Because if we just take the old model that was there before and put green on top of it, it's going to cause us a whole world of problems. And for the young people who are about to go out there and hopefully be able to get whatever job it is that you have always dreamed of, and maybe it's in that world, then we need to be able to make sure that not only are you going through worker training programs, which are important, but that you have the opportunity to own your own business in this space. And here's why. Solar, wind, less than 2% of those jobs are owned by people of color. But this is supposed to be the new paradigm. So what's new about The same old going on. Now, I'm not saying that those are not important. Those are extremely important. But as equally important is the fact that we need to be able to own jobs in that space and own those businesses in that space. And for me, that's power. Does that make sense to everybody? But y'all don't believe that you got power. And some of y'all know me. And everything that I talk about now is connected to power. Whether it's our cultural influencers getting in, you know, you see when these storms come through, some people show up for a second and then they're gone. And y'all saw the slide of Beyonce. So Beyonce's been going back and forth to Houston. You know, she was there. You saw some of the other folks. I never, until I started actually doing some more stuff with the Hip Hop Caucus, knew that Cedric the Entertainer was, you know, connected to our issues. How many people know who Cedric is? All right, I just wanted to see what kind of audience we got here. So Cedric's family been impacted also by a plant that was right down the street from where his parents were living. And he's one, you know, super wealthy, natural gas plant. And all of a sudden, people in that community were starting to get hit by all these different types of illnesses and stuff. So, you know, he got engaged. You see some of the other folks who are engaged with Flint. You know, folks who you might not naturally assume would be engaged in these issues. Everybody from Snoop to a whole bunch of other folks. That's a part of this new paradigm that we have to design, where we get folks who are cultural influencers grounded and anchored in the truth of what's going on, making sure that they are sharing the proper information, but us all coming together to help make real change happen. But going back to power. People will tell you, and some of the folks who are in the room have heard me talk about this before, that you don't have power. If there's one thing you take away from the words that I share with you, and what one of my most incredible mentors taught me, and his name was Damu Smith. He used to talk to me, especially being a young man of color, about realizing that you have power. He gave me a whole bunch of other hard lessons also that I had to learn. It took me a while on some of them. But people will tell you you don't have power, and I'll prove to you that you do. So how many folks in the room remember the Women's March, the first one? Let's see, everybody almost got their hands up. Somebody was scared to put their hands up. When I looked, they was like, yes, I remember. I don't want Mustafa coming over here next to me. So, y'all remember, and it was primarily men who told women that 1 million women would never come together. And sisters said, oh yeah. I think when you tell a lady that she can't do something, you already know it's gonna get done. And they came and they marched, and people have heard me talk about that, and they hear me talk about that the marching is important because it highlights the issue, but more importantly, it is the taking back of that to where you come from. And now you have a huge new set of women, both on city councils and county commissions and in state houses. And when you go on Capitol Hill now, and I hope that you do because they need to hear your voice, and you look at all those new faces, because those sisters went back and they said, if I can't find someone who will protect my family, if I can't find someone who will represent my views, then I will do it myself. That's power. And I hope that there are people in this room who will make the decision that if the folks who are representing you are not doing it properly, I don't care if they're Democrat, Republican, or independent, that you will run yourself, or you will find somebody who is authentic and you will help to support them. That's power. How many folks remember the Science March? I don't know, all y'all who say you scientists, you better remember. I was there, some of us else were there. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't think scientists would come out their labs because I knew a whole bunch of them. And some of them, there's like Mustafa, is it okay to come out? I was like, yeah, you can come out. They was like, you sure? I was like, yeah, come on. They stuck their toe out. It got good to them because nothing bad happened. They came on out. And then we began to march. And Leslie done heard me tell this story before. Can I tell y'all a secret? They ain't have a whole lot of rhythm. They just didn't. Bless their heart, as my grandmother would say. But we said left, right, don't worry about it, just march. And they marched. And they brought attention to the issue that our federal government was saying that science doesn't matter. saying that science isn't real. And they did it because they were trying to manipulate policy. And the beauty of that moment is that you had folks like the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Thriving Earth Exchange, folks from colleges and universities who began to give back in a more meaningful way to those communities who needed to have someone to help walk with them around the understanding of some of these impacts and some of these things that are going on with climate change, and partnering around citizen science. That's power. When people come together and honor each other. Now, if you don't come in that space and you're not honoring each other, then don't come in that space. We've had Black Lives Matter. We've had folks going to the airports around the Muslim ban, saying that these types of things do not represent who we are as a country. And then we had the Youth March on climate change, where young people were saying that we want to work with you, but if you are not willing to do what's necessary, then we will stand out, stand up, and do it for ourselves. And I honor that, but at the same time, they should not have to carry and be responsible. You gave me the mic, so I ain't sitting down. Be quiet. So, that's powerful. And we have to realize that we actually have power. Y'all do me a favor. Everybody say power. Power. That's actually not bad. I've been some places with thousands of people, and it was not quite as enthusiastic as you are at the end of the day when you're very tired and that macaroni and mashed potatoes is kicking in. Let's try it again. Everybody say power. Power. Everybody look to the person on your left-hand side. Don't stare. It's the end of the day. I know some of y'all mad. Look to the person on your right-hand side. See, you shouldn't have sat at the table by yourself. You're just looking silly now. Do me a favor, reach your left hand out to the person on your left-hand side. And if your neighbor does not know their left, please help them. Reach your right hand out to the person on the right-hand side, or get as close as you can. And everybody do me a favor, everybody stand up. If you can, if you can. See, some of y'all were just easing back, wasn't you? You was like, I didn't know this was going to be participatory. I want y'all to think about something, and you know, I talk about this, I'm sure many of you talk about this. You know, we are living in a time, and it has even happened before this moment in time, where we've had folks who have tried to separate us. They knew that if they could separate us, then they could continue with some foolishness that they were doing. They could continue holding on to power and manipulating that power to do the things that they wanted to be able to do. But sometimes we play into this. I want you to think about this. How many in the room have a cell phone? Everybody just nod. There you go. It's hard to find somebody who don't have a cell phone now, but there, you know, it's possible. So how many times have our cell phone been in our pocket or our purse and not even charged? And we are walking down the street, we see somebody we don't want to talk to, and we will take it out and act like we talking on the phone, right? It's a way for us to avoid people, to stay separate from people. And this is the one that I experienced the other day. You ever get on the elevator and you see those numbers that are there and you stare at them and you say, Lord, please don't let anybody ask me anything, right? We separate ourselves. The government's not doing that. We are. You see what I'm saying? And until we begin to embrace our humanity, and the reason you are holding each other's hands is you may know some of the people who are at your table. But when we touch each other, when we go through things with each other, it humanizes us. And it gives us the opportunity to move away from the isms that far too often are what hold us back from actually making real change happen. Y'all do me a favor. Everybody drop your hands. Put your right hand in the air like it's 1968 at the Olympics. Dr. Hollis, no. And I want y'all to say something different this time. I want y'all to say power to the people. Power to the people. Y'all just like them scientists. That was no rhythm in that whatsoever. I'm back on my old campus. Hang on, let me try it again. Power to the people. Power to the people. This time, say it so that the folks in Annapolis, who you've had some challenges with, and folks down there on Pennsylvania Avenue know that there are folks who are focused, who are committed, and who are willing to stand up and help make real change happen. Everybody say power to the people. Power to the people. I'm Mustafa Santiago Ali. Thank y'all for a couple minutes of your time.
So we have time for a few questions for Mustafa. I know y'all ready to go. Any questions? So I'm gonna be the mic runner. You can use that mic right there. I'm a mic runner. I mean a mic walker. I'm sorry, not really running. Okay, let me go. I'm gonna go here first.
Thank you, and Dr. Jacoby and Mr. Ali, I really take to heart everything that I've heard today, everything you both said, and including the Green New Deal is not only about it's saving the earth, it's saving all the people. And I've heard three comments back when I tell neighbors and politicians that I'm for the Green New Deal, and they push back and they're not for it. These are the three things I hear. They say, it's more complicated than you say, there's no money for it, and in this country, change only is step-by-step incremental. There's no such thing as revolution. Okay. What's the best response?
Okay, well, exactly. Power to the people. Folks are always going to say that. So they told folks that we couldn't go to the moon. People decided that we could. You know, and let me just back up a little bit. So here's some of these things that they say that will destroy the country. So they told folks that if we took lead out of gasoline, that the country's economy would actually collapse. They were wrong. They told folks that if we dealt with acid rain, and I've spent a lot of time up around the Great Lakes, that it would once again collapse the economy and that the money didn't exist to be able to do it. They were wrong. And there is a laundry list of that type of stuff. So our country, and hopefully the planet, can do what's necessary. It is a matter of actually prioritizing those things that need to actually happen and for change to happen. And then what was the last part?
The last thing was that change is only incremental,
Yeah.
step by step, and
Yeah.
you can't expect revolution.
Yep. And also the other part with money is I can literally show you where there are hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that exist that we could be able to utilize. And you guys, you know most of this. It's just the general, ridiculous talking points that people use. And the other part about incremental change, I understand that because we are creatures of habit, but this is different. And when it comes to the impacts that are happening from climate change, if we don't address these now, and if we don't address them in an equitable and justice fashion, there will be no coming back from this. And here, so just so we really, really get what's going on, because I just had this deep conversation with some scientists and activists and others. So we know that, let's use some things that are in the news. So you've seen the brothers and sisters coming from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador and these other places, right? Now, most people don't talk about the fact that there's been these droughts that have happened. 80% of the people work in the agricultural, so they are looking and moving to try and find a way to survive and to be in a better place. Yes, there are governmental issues also with some of the governments they come from. What's going to happen from climate change is that you're going to have a huge amount of people all across the planet in different locations who are going to be moving and pushing forward. So if you think there are stressors now, it just makes sense to invest and help to address that beforehand to make sure that people can stay where they are or that we have the protections in place if they do need to move. And here's the other dynamic. All the folks in our country who are nice and comfortable, a whole bunch of them are going to get pushed also and going to have to move. So we might want to strengthen our relationships with Canada because a whole bunch of us might end up being Canadian here in the not so distant future. And there are a bunch of other dynamics that go along with that, So I was just in the Great Lakes, and you look out and you see all of this fresh water. And then you go to other parts of the country that are really struggling to be able to find and to continue to have fresh water. And that's another thing that is going to disappear at a very rapid rate if we don't get these things. So climate change is a different dynamic than we've dealt with any of these other social challenges that we've had. And people had a little bit of time to be able to deal with some of this other stuff. But with this one, it's completely different. And my concern is, and I'm sure many of the people in the room, is that the folks who have done the least to contribute to it, but who also have the least resources to be able to deal with these challenges and impacts that are coming, are the ones that are going to get left behind. And people are going to start to hoard. And you see these folks who create these little compounds and everything else and only want to take care of what they want to take care of. We're going to have all these different dynamics if we don't get this stuff right and move forward. So they're going to say some of those things, but history has shown that the money exists, that we have the innovation, but it goes back to what Sister Naima was saying. It's about the power of the people and getting engaged and getting the right people in place, helping to make sure there's true energy democracy moving forward. And unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to talk about what real energy democracy looks like. But that's another part of that overall climate equation. So I hope that helps a little bit.
So this is going to be our last question.
How you doing, brother?
I'm blessed.
I had a question earlier. You touched on solar power and the minority ownership in solar power, and you said it was somewhere around 2%.
Yep.
I wanted to know, as far as minority organizations, how are they looking to increase that number, and how are they looking to implement things such as what Akon did in his country?
Yeah, I've worked with Akon before. I don't know if there is enough attention right now. You have Mike Ewald, who's here. He's an expert on energy justice issues. There are folks who are doing some great things in that space, Volt Energy and some others. I just don't know. I think people are beginning to catch up and are beginning to focus more in that space. But we need more support around some of our STEM schools and STEM programs to help folks to understand how they can move into that. They're doing some great work on that down in Spartanburg. There's a STEM school, and the kids there are phenomenal. They know how to, they've done robotics. They've actually built androids, fully working androids. They train the young people in all of the various applications around solar and wind, so they actually know each and every one of the parts that are in these giant windmills, and they're moving forward on creating some advanced manufacturing opportunities where some of those students will be able to move into that space if they want to. But that's like a drop in the bucket. And there are some of the organizations who are also, some of the big organizations are getting more focused, but we need folks like the Black MBA Association. We need others that are in those spaces to also understand these opportunities, but to make sure that there is real justice in whatever model. Because just because it is an organization of color does not mean that they operate from that type of a paradigm. So we just got to make sure, that all the right pieces are there. My problem also is, or my concern is that sometimes folks of color get invited into a space after it's already saturated and after all the wealth has been pulled out of it. And I've seen it time and time and time again. Cell phones, everybody got a cell phone, but when I ask people in the room how many folks own a cell phone company, I've only had one hand ever go up. And I've talked to, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to a lot of daggone people. And you can go through that. You can look at cable, you can look at all these different types of things. So as we're moving into this new clean, green economy, I want us to be laser focused on making sure that we're taking advantage of these opportunities and positioning ourselves properly and building co-ops and other things that can also be beneficial in that space. So I think there's a way for us to do some of that, but our conferences need to have a major focus on that, and in our curricula and our organizations who have a lot of things they have to focus on also need to be making sure that they're highlighting that and bringing in folks who have expertise in that space. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Let's thank Mustafa again. So I want to thank everybody again for participating this year. And the theme was health, law, and policy. I want to invite you to our next year's event. It will be May 9th next year. I will be remiss of not saying Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers in the room. So let's thank all the mothers and grandmothers in the room. I also want to say Happy Mother's Day to Mother Earth, because it's part of why we here, right? So you got that. And so next year's theme would more than likely be on citizen science as a larger theme, and probably to focus on youth and STEM next year. And before you should get an email tonight or tomorrow about filling out the evaluation. So please fill that out. Give us feedback on this event, what you would like to see happen. Many of you, I know we talked about, there were too many sessions. We need more time to talk. And one of the ideas I have is maybe we can do some follow-up webinars from some of the sessions. So some of the speakers can do a webinar, and that'd be another opportunity to continue the conversation, because many of you are going to go back to your states, go back home, but we want to be able to maintain this momentum. So please give us that feedback. We really need it, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you again. Good night, and enjoy your Mother's Day.